Hello everyone. Today we will talk about the Gulag Archipelago made by the Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a famous writer of the 1970s who won a Nobel Prize. So, who was he? His father died before he was born. He spent his childhood with his mother in Rostov-on-Don, where he graduated in mathematics while also taking literary courses. In 1941, he participated in the war, and although he was decorated several times, he was accused of anti-Soviet activities. This was because a letter he wrote mocking Stalin, and so he went to the Gulag and sentenced to 8 years of forced labor and additional years of confinement until 1956, when he was allowed to return to teaching. And he wrote the Gulag Archipelago about the prison camps and his novel portrait of Lenin. And he also adopted an American citizenship but also to engage in intense journalistic activity to criticize communism in his home country. And he won the Nobel Prize in 1970. And in, 90, and in 1994, he returned to homeland after residing in exile in the United States for nearly 20 years. 4 years earlier, he had regained Soviet citizenship. And all charges against him from mid-1970s had been dropped. And he died in August 2008 at the age of 89 due to a heart failure. Now, we saw in the previous video regarding Dostoevsky that he predicted the future, that all those news ideas of communism, of revolution, those ideas that man has no free will, that morality is not something real in the world, that God does not exist, we saw that Dostoevsky predicted that those ideas will be very bloody, that there will be a mess in the world. And it was true. The Gulag killed 60 millions of people in only 20 years. Pol Pot killed the 20% of Cambodia's population in his communist revolution. Hitler killed 6,000 Jews in the Holocaust. And Nanking died yes, 300, if I'm not mistaken, no, 3,000 Chinese in only 7 weeks. So yes, it was very bloody. Now, something that we can see in the book is the event called decolonization. What was the decolonization? It was a Soviet campaign of political repression against the wealthier peasants, known as kulaks and their families, which through arrests, deportations, and executions severely affected millions of people during the period of 1929 to 32. Now, apparently, according to the propaganda, those kulaks, they were the wealthy peasants, those peasants who were millionaires, who had no worries in the world, who were wealthy. Now, that is a lie. In actuality, those were not wealthy peasants, millionaires, 2% of the population. No, no, no. They were actually middle class, above the middle class, that is not high class, but not millionaire in the sense that they are 2% of the population. No, they were peasants who had farms, who had money, who had good houses, who could live honestly through their work. However, according to the communists, those people, they were anti-revolutionary. The state demanded their the production, demanded the lands, and so the state stole it from them. Let us read Alexander. He says, yes, anyone who had a brick house in a row of log houses or a two-story house in a row of one-story houses, that person was a kulak. Back up, you bastard. In 60 minutes, there shall be no brick houses in the Russian village. No two short two-story houses. Back to the caves. Light your way with torches. That was our grand transformative mission. There has been none like it in history. No, we have maligned socialist realist literature. Yes, It does depict the decolonization, of course it does, even quite fluently, and with great sympathy as a hunt for ferocious wolves. What is not depicted, however, is a village along the street with all the windows boarded up, or how you cross the village, and in an entryway you see a dead woman with a dead child in her lap, or an old man sitting by a fence asking for bread, and when you return, he has already fallen dead. Those were not millionaire 2% of the population. No, those were those were honest people who, through their work, they could live honestly and good. Those people, those people, the state robbed them, took their lands, and take them to concentration camps. Not only that, but also the people who went to the Gulag, they were innocent. It must be the first time such a phenomenon has occurred in the world's history of prisons. Millions of individuals imprisoned who know they are innocent and are convinced of the innocence of their fellow inmates. All of them aware that no one there has committed in the slightest wrongdoing, and the treatment of the church, firing them from their jobs just because of their faith, sending consumables to break their windows, administratively forcing believers to attend anti-religious lectures, sawing the doors of churches with autogenous welding equipment, pulling down domes with cables attached to tractors, dispersing the elderly with firehouses. There were thousands of Christian groups and authorities, but who can count them? They perish in the darkness, shining with the light like a candle. Only a few steps away from them, they were the best Christians in Russia. The others, the worst, were afraid, renounced, and hid. And so the Soviet Union stole from the church. They destroyed the church, as you can see that, because they were anti-religious. They wanted the state to rule over everyone. Not only that, but also the population was disarmed. They took their weapons. Disarmament of the population under the penal code. The state prohibits citizens from possessing firearms or bladed weapons, but it does not take on the responsibility of the protection. The state leaves its citizens at the mercy of criminals, and through the media addressed to incite society to resist these criminals. But resist them with what? With umbrellas? With rolling pins? And not only that, but our writers, and not the least of them, decided that criminals were our allies in the construction of communism. These are the arguments put forth. Professional criminals cannot in any way be confused with capitalist elements, such as engineers, students, lawyers. The latter are consistently hostile to the dictatorship of the proletariat. So, according to the communist thinkers, those honest working people, engineers, students, lawyers, all of those people, they are evil, they are bad. Why? Because they work with the capitalist system. They endorse a capitalistic system that oppresses man, that takes away their product, that takes away their work, that is evil. However, the criminal is a victim of capitalism. He rebels against capitalism, and therefore he was like an ally of the revolution. And so they glorified the criminal. But not only that, but thousands of people died in public construction projects. For example, the Belmore Tunnel was constructed in just 20 months with minimal machinery, relying solely on manual labor from hundreds of thousands of innocent people imprisoned in Russia. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn raised the estimate to 30,000. And the tunnel was built to connect the Baltic Sea to the White Sea, with a total length of 2,027 kilometers. And Alexander says, it's becoming clearer and clearer. So, Stalin and the people needed that the tunnel so urgently that not a single cent in foreign currency was spared. That's right. let 100,000 men work on it simultaneously. What better capital than that? And deliver it within 20 months, not a day more. This is where one becomes infuriated with those sabotaging engineers. The engineers say, we'll build with concrete. But the chartists respond, there is no time. And the engineers say, we need a lot of iron. And the chartists say, replace it with wood. And the engineers say, we need tractors, cranes, construction machines. But the chartists respond, you won't have any of that, not a single cent in foreign currency. Do it all by hand. And this is the greatness of this construction. It is carried out without the aid of modern technology and without the nation's resources. We are not dealing with the declining pace of Euro-American capitalism, well, but with the socialist pace. No, it would be unfair to compare this absurd construction of the 20th century to the transcontinental canal built with pickaxes, shovels, and carts, to the Egyptian pyramids, as the pyramids were constructed using the most advanced technology of their time. Instead, we regressed 40 centuries back. That's how this extermination was carried out, because there was no fuel for gas chambers. And this is the analogy that even the pyramids were more humanitarian. The Egyptians, they were more humanitarians than the Russians, that the Egypts were a project more humanitarian than what the Russians did. Because the Soviet Union did not give those innocent people, because they were innocent, they were not criminals, they were innocent people that had the bad luck to be chosen by the state to die in a meaningless construction. Those people, they were used by the state with nothing more than pickaxes, shovels, and carts. The Egyptians, they used their technology, they used their brains, they used the tools that they had in hand. However, the Soviet Union did not give them tools. They wanted them to die, to work to death, to be slaves. And of course, the worst part of this, the cannibal Iceland Nasino and the Ukrainian genocide, the mass deportation of 6,700 to 6,800 people, of whom 400 died, is known as the Nasino tragedy. This occurred on Nasino Island in the Soviet Union in 1923. Entire families forced to feed on grass or oak bark, and even the consumption of dogs and cats. The situation reached such a point that some historians claim that in the poorest rural areas, cannibalism became widespread, and corpses piled up in the streets because no one had the strength to bury them. And yes, that censorship that you can see there are human remains. But how did common people become monsters? And this is because of ideology. Here is what provides the sole justification for evil and the required problem hardness for the evildoer. The social theories that helps them whitewash their actions before themselves and others, replacing reproaches and curses with praise and honors. Thus, the Inquisitors found comfort in Christianity, the conquerors in the aggrandizement of the homeland, the colonizers in civilization, the Nazis in race, the Jacobeans in equality, fraternity, and the happiness of future generations. Thanks to ideology, the 20th century has to witness the evil committed against millions of human beings. It's something that cannot be refuted, sidelined, or silenced. So how do we dare to insist that there are no evildoers? Who then annihilated those millions without evildoers? There would not have been an archipelago. We must publicly condemn the very idea that some men can truly punish others. When we remain silent about evil, we bury it within ourselves so that it doesn't surface. We are sowing it, and it will sprout 1,000 times in the future. If we don't punish and even condemn evildoers, we are doing more than caring for the miserable old age. We are undermining the very foundations of justice for the future generations. That is why they grow indifferent, Not due to weak educational efforts, the youth assimilate that weakness is never punished on earth, which aids its property how uncomfortable and terrible it will be to live in a country like that. That is why we have to condemn the idea that people do not deserve to live, that we must condemn the idea that violence is a way, is a response. We must condemn the idea that there is such a thing as enemies. We never have to excuse the criminal. We have to punish him. We have to reject those ideas of punishment, of revenge, and hatred. We have to teach society. Society has to learn that violence is not a way. That we don't have to kill each other. That we have to be just and use punishment under justice, which is different than the idea that there are enemies, that we have to take revenge. And what did Alexander learn? This is what he learned. Isn't the fundamental problem of the 20th century whether it is permissible to follow orders entrusting one's own conscience to the judgment of others? Is it permissible not to have one's own conception of good and evil, and instead derive it from printed regulations and oral orders of the superiors? Let us remember what Vasily Blasov was thinking of telling his executioner, even in 1937. Only you, only you are to blame for people being killed. You alone will bear the weight of my death, and you will live with that burden. If there were no executioners, there would be no executions. If there were no store traps, there would be no concentration camps. It was the blame of the people. The people did it. It was not a funny guy with a funny mustache. It were the people. It was society as a whole. Society as a whole could have said, no, I will not do it. But they do it anyway. And this is because good and evil is in the heart of every person. And Solzhenitsyn says. And what can be said about a manifest murderers? Why doesn't destiny punish them? Why do they thrive? The only serious solution is to admit that the purpose of our earthly life is not prosperity as we are accustomed to think, but the development of the soul. From that perspective, our murderers suffer the worst punishment. They turn into swine, departing from humanity downwards. Intoxicated by the success of my youth, I felt infallible, and for that very reason I was cruel, and I abused my power, and I killed and violated. In my moment of greatest weaknesses, I was convinced that I was doing good, supported by logical arguments. It was on the rotten prison mattress when I first felt a glimmer of goodness within me. Gradually, I came to understand that the boundary between good and evil does not lie between states or parties, but runs through every human heart and all human hearts. This boundary is movable, it oscillates within us over the years. Even a heart invaded by evil always retains a small bastion of good. And then I understood the truth of all religions in the world. They fight against the evil within man. And then I understood the lie of all revolutions in history. They only suppress the agents of evil contemporary to them, but the evil itself, and even more, they pass it down as an inheritance. It must be noted, in favor of the 20th century, the Nuremberg trials aim to kill the very malignant idea itself, and very little the individuals contaminated by it. Know thyself. Nothing fosters the awakening of the spirit of understanding within us as much as painful reflections of our own faults, flaws, and mistakes. That's why I look back on the years of my imprisonment and say to the amazement of those who reveal my suffering, blessed be you, prison. And that is what we ought to learn, that we are all guilty, that we are all responsible for each other, and that beauty will save the world.